Hello, it's my great pleasure to welcome, hopefully on a screen in front of me here, Henry Kissinger, to ask him questions on your behalf. So hopefully Henry is going to appear.
Make it a little louder.
I can hear your voice, Henry. Welcome to the New Economy Forum. Thank you again for talking to us. I know how much you tried to get here. I was going to begin by asking you about the last physical meeting that we had of the New Economy Forum in 2019. You warned us about being in the foothills of a new Cold War with China. And then in the last virtual version of this, you told me that you thought we had reached the high mountain passes. That was back in the days of Donald Trump. Since then, of course, we have had the Biden presidency, and I think it would be fair to say that the first period of the Biden presidency was one of increased tensions with China. But over the past week, we have seen, in a sense, a kind of come down the mountain. We had the deal to do with climate at COP, and now we've had this conversation between President Xi and President Biden, which, as Wang Qishan said earlier, was there were common understandings. And I suppose my first question for you is, are we beginning to come down the mountain, or do you still see this as a relationship heading in the wrong direction?
I'd say we are through the mountain pass on a precipice from which you can look in both directions. And now it depends which direction is chosen.
Being on the edge of a precipice is never normally a good start, but all the same, on the necessary conditions for us to start coming down the mountain, so to speak, what do you think America needs to do? What does Joe Biden need to do to help change this relationship if he wants to do that?
I think both sides have to adapt the view that a conflict between major technical powers of comparable capacities must not occur for the preservation of humanity. And they therefore have to decide that they will attempt to compose their differences to a level in which coexistence becomes not only possible, but essential. I think the conversations this weekend, last few days, were a good beginning of the statement of a possible mood. They now have to be followed by concrete discussions that lead in the direction both presidents have affirmed they want to pursue.
Where do you see America in that, just to push you on that? Do you think that America is committed to a better relationship with China, or do you think it still sees it as a strategic rival? What is your impression of the Biden administration?
It is inherent, it's inherent in the technology and economy of each side that countries will consider each other as competitors. And public opinion in the United States has moved into the direction of looking at China as a rival. The necessity for both sides is to see whether from that posture they can move towards a pattern in which disputes are attempted to be mitigated, and in which they realize that a victor is not possible without a risk of destroying humanity.
On that particular thing, are there particular areas that you would want to see America, and for that matter China, concentrating on? We have seen the progress on climate, but are there other areas, other opportunities that you can see where there is room for cooperation?
Well, there has been some progress made on climate change, and there is a whole range of technical issues in which cooperation between the two sides could bring benefit. And there are also tensions in the world in which cooperation between China and the United States, say on nuclear proliferation, is of the greatest importance. So there are many topics which it is at least important to begin to see whether the views of the two sides are sufficiently compatible to permit cooperation, and if that is not possible, how to prevent them from moving towards conflict.
Are you convinced about China's good intentions in this? I mean, if you talk to a lot of people in the United States, or indeed in the West, they will say that China is sort of bent on becoming a bigger power, and that America and other things are in its way. It wants to go its own way. It is merely biding its time. Do you see the current Chinese regime, which you know well, do you see that as one which does want that degree of cooperation that you've just spoken about?
My task as a student of foreign policy is not primarily to psychoanalyze the Chinese regime. I assume that Chinese leaders will work towards the maximum capability of their country. Our task as Americans and non-Chinese is to understand what we need to do to make sure that there is at least equivalence and in no case subordination. If we understand that, and if the Chinese understand their interests, as I believe they are very capable of, then it should be possible to make arrangements by which the level of competition is reduced to a point that makes even cooperative measures possible. I'm assuming that China will operate at a high level of its capacities, because that is the Confucian tradition and that is inherent in Chinese history. It is our obligation to work at an equivalent level of capacity, and then to ask ourselves whether the world will not be better off if we deal with the outstanding issues like climate change, like artificial intelligence, like economic relationships, from the point of view that leads to benefit for both sides.
I would imagine that after 60, 70 years, you might have graduated from a student to at least an undergraduate in analyzing the Chinese administration. But I wondered, what What role is there in this for Europe? I mean, it's interesting in this debate here, it's a word one barely hears mentioned, yet it is still, the European Union is still the world's biggest economy. What role does Europe have in this geopolitics?
For my generation of American thinkers, the relationship with Europe has been a central feature of American foreign policy. And the Atlantic Partnership is of crucial importance. But the problems of the Atlantic Partnership when it was formed had to do, on the whole, with Russian challenges. Now, the Chinese challenges are of a different cultural and substantive nature than the ones that were posed by the Europeans, by Europe. So we cannot automatically apply all the lessons of Europe to the conditions of Asia. But I would expect that in a general sense, Europe would look at America's problems in other parts of the world with sympathy and with understanding, and that we in turn will understand that on some specific issues, the Europeans, because of different geography, history, and economy, might have special concerns, but the overall lines of policy should be that Europe and the United States cooperate with allowances for special conditions that may exist by country or region.
Can I ask you about one thing which I know has obsessed you over the past couple of years? Artificial intelligence. You have a book on it, The Age of AI, and it is a large part of the competition between China and America. In your book, you describe AI as the biggest change in human thinking since the Enlightenment. Given that importance, how do you see the contest between US and China in terms of artificial intelligence?
Well, first of all, artificial intelligence is a departure in human thinking comparable to that which produced the Enlightenment. So a whole new school of intellectual evolution is bound to develop when the results are achieved by achieving a result without exactly knowing what the reason for it is, but knowing that it is produced by an algorithmic understanding of events. That is a huge change in human thinking. Now, China has the same challenge, how to adjust its thinking to this reality. Now, if we deal with this entirely in entirely competitive terms, and if we try to determine who is superior, and if we don't even know how to define a level, what a level of superiority is, which is strategically useful, we could be engaging in a race which, as a result of accidents, leads to consequences which we cannot foresee. So I would hope that a way will be found by which technological discussions between the two sides take place, which permit also an adjustment of economic competition. Neither side will accept a permanently inferior standing, but both sides have to understand that the other will not concede a permanently superior standing. So a dialogue that starts from these realities is essential. And there can be no winners in an AI race if both sides do what they need to do.
Can I push you on one particular last thing to do with that? You mentioned nuclear conflict before. You were involved, obviously, in the talks with the Soviet Union about that. In your book and in conversation, you have made the point that cyber warfare is completely different because, firstly, it is harder for people to say exactly what they have because often that is giving away competitive advantage. But also the bigger idea that we now have computers which, in order to fight each other, should operate almost without human control. Is there a kind of organization or a governing principle that America and China should join in on this? Is there a way in which you could have a modern version of disarmament?
Well, the logic of cyber warfare is to operate at a speed which is beyond human capacity. And therefore, the temptation is to build automatic responses into weapon systems. But if you deprive these issues of any human element, then the danger that the systems might make a judgment which you didn't foresee, and the danger of an automatic conflagration become very great. So how to build human judgment into cyber confrontations, and how to solve the problem that these types of weapons are usually kept very secret within each country. So to expose them to discussion with a foreign country is not a matter that has been ever done before, but without it, it will not be possible to achieve meaningful restraints. But these attempts to achieve restraints must not become a way of intelligence exploitation so much as a way of, or at all, but as a way of looking at a novel, it's elemental change in human cognition, which is now imposed on us to deal with. And a few hundred years ago, the German philosopher Kant predicted that peace would be achieved at some point in human history, either by human insight or by catastrophes of a magnitude that will permit no other choice. We are at exactly that point in our conduct, and the responsibility of our leaders is to try to fulfill it. And I must say, I think the dialogue has begun on an appropriate level, appropriate to the challenge.
Henry Kissinger, thank you very much for talking to us. You put us on a precipice and you ended up with Immanuel Kant, but thank you very much, and thank you very much also for being our co-chairman. You are much missed. Thank you for staying up late to do this, and we will see you next year. Thank you.